Welcome to the JMER podcast. It's my great pleasure to have Diane with me today. Diane has served as the production editor for JMER over the years and has an extensive background in editing and publishing. And her experience in the field has really made a lasting impact on the journal. And I'm so excited to hear from her today about her journey and insights. To start, could you tell us a little bit about your early career and what initially drew you to the field of, editing and publishing?
My initial entry into education as a professional was a school librarian. And my education then went beyond that until I got my doctorate and began working, teaching people to become school librarians. And just then the technology was coming in. So I was also teaching them to become instructional technologists in our public schools. That gave me the insight as to what was happening in education as well as what was going on in technology. And I spent 40 years in public education.
Wow.
I retired. And then I get a phone call from my associate dean saying, "We're looking for somebody to help us with this new online journal. And we need to have somebody that knows technology, but knows the educational field and what's going on in research and what that means." And he was asking me to come help. So that's how I started with the Journal of Curriculum Instruction that was housed in our College of Education at East Carolina University. That's in Goldsboro, North Carolina. So that was my beginnings. Now, that was after I had retired. So coming off of retirement, going back into education again. And I was the one that was to help the professors and the authors that were working with the journal and doing the research and helping them to understand the technology that was going to help drive the publication. Now, that journal was completely online. The uniqueness of it is we also was able to record it so that people could download it as an MPEG, as a file that they could then put on their electronic devices or even record it on a tape to play on their way to and from work or to and from commuting. So that was back in 2007. That was the beginning of my work with an educational journal.
Wow.
Basically, what I did was to help the people get their documents in the proper format, fill in all the blanks, knowing which fields to fill in for what. Let the people that were there at the university, those still employed, still doing the research, let them take care of that part of it. And I just handled the technology part. Of course, part of the work that we were doing too at that time was helping teacher education majors put their portfolios online. So I had also done that kind of work that sort of prepared me for dealing with some of the professors too. While there at East Carolina, we had one professor that was in the special education department. Now remember, this is North Carolina, so we did not necessarily have a bilingual department, but she was bilingual. And next thing we knew, she was working with us in that journal. She ended up going to Fordham.
Wow.
That was Dr. Rodriguez, Diane Rodriguez. So she knew about me. And when your journal was looking for somebody to help out, I guess that was about in 2012, she recommended me. And so I got a call from your senior editor that asked if I would be interested. So that was my link that started me working with JMER. So it was, I had, let's see, I had 7 years with the first journal, and then I had a break there, and we actually had another one that was in rural education. I was helping that one. That was at East Carolina too. And now I think I'm coming to the end of my work with JMER.
I'm really curious because you have has such a long career. How have you seen the field evolve over the years?
It's been an interesting thing, and things change. Different people will change at a different pace.
Mm.
So when I started out with the first journal, most of them did well to even word process. And here
Mm.
we had to do things that would do the editing that required you to put it into a format that would be acceptable online. Of course, you use software that's going to help you. That's a good thing, but you still have to do the basics and making sure your citations are genuine, and we use a standard across the publishing professions, and that has been something that a lot of people don't want to keep up with, but that was my job to make sure that we were following the accepted format of items that were coming through and getting them ready to publish. You've got things that have changed so that it used to be you publish a book and it had a special number on it that identified the book for a little barcode reader. And
Mm.
that's how they would purchase a book with that little barcode. And they realized, well, that could also apply to digital publications. So there
Wow.
became a new thing that was called a digital object identifier, DOI, and that is attached to each publication. So each article now has this digital identifier that if you put that in a search engine, it will go online and find that article for you. And that's a big change. And you want to make sure that all of these things are accurate. You've got your DOIs that have to be um, recorded and indexed, and you want everything to be smooth so that people don't get a 404 error that tells them they
Mm.
can't find it. Uh, that has been one of the biggest changes. And with that is changing the attitudes and the ability for the authors to do their job too. Uh,
Mm.
I can remember when we had to do things on a typewriter, and you know that you roll the thing in there, you got the thing going on your typewriter, and you made one little mistake, or you didn't leave enough room at the bottom to put that footnote, and you wrinkle that all up and have to start all over again. Well, you know, that's changed. And doing it electronically has made that part of the publication give researchers more time to put the thought into how they're organizing and how they're presenting the work that they're doing in researching and in reporting back, as well as telling their own story and what's happening in education. Well, I sort of came in about the same time the technology was coming in. So for me, it was not a fast learning. To me, my definition of technology is something I used to tell my students in the library that were studying the Dewey Decimal System. You may
Yeah.
remember it. And in the
Yes.
Dewey Decimal System, there were numbers that went along with the way it was designed. You had science in the number 500, and then you had some 600s that were telling you how you use the science. And then came the 700s, that was technology, and that was how do you apply technology to work for you.
Mm.
And so I took that as a challenge. How can I get this technology to work for me as a librarian?
Mm.
And so that's brought me into it because it was going to make my life easier. And it did. But it also got me going in some of the other directions because I was learning more and more what it could do, not only for the library, but for education itself. And that's what kept me moving and kept learning the new things that were happening.
Coming back to JMER, I know that like your role is so crucial, but often also behind the scenes. Can you walk us through the process of your time working as the production editor for JMER?
The journal right now is divided into research and theory papers. And then you have some that are more on practice or on pedagogy. And we also have book reviews or media reviews. And so those are grouped, and we have an editor with each of those groups so that it's a team effort. The editors will be assigned to the paper, corresponds with the author to get it ready to submit out to what's called peer review. That means that other educators, without knowing who wrote the paper, will read the paper as presented and make a decision whether it's something they can work with, if there's some revisions or some cleanup to it or some questions answered, or whether it's close to being ready for publication, or whether it just doesn't fit the purpose of JMER. So those decisions are made before I even see any of the documents. Once the reviewers are done, those section editors make the decision, working with those authors, as to whether it is when it's ready. And then I'll get an email that says, ready for your eyes, from the senior editor. And she's ready for me to give it a look over and to check to make sure that it's under the APA style of and formatting, as well as any other typos, suggestions, needing things to be edited. Goes back and forth a couple of more times, sometimes more times than really that you'd like to see. But there are so many little fine points when you do something that's going to be actually published that you need to be sure that it's accurate. Because if the author has used a certain reference and talked about it in the paper, it also has to be listed in the references at the end of the paper. So that has to be checked. There's so many little things that are required, and that's part of my job, is to keep on picking on those little things and making sure that it's done in the style that is acceptable in publishing world and in the academic world.
That's what always boggles my mind, is how do you do that? When I just go through my own paper and going back and forth, it's a very difficult process. And I cannot imagine like you going through all of these papers back and forth and editing all the details, fine prints, the punctuations and every single thing. It's like, how do you develop the eye to quickly catch those little things?
I'm not sure how I developed it, but in the library world, we had to do cards on every book.
Wow.
And that there was a format for that. You had a certain way of putting things on the first line. You remember the old card catalog?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did many cards. That was another reason for using a computer. I ended up so I could make those cards electronically. Because you had to have like 2 or 3 or 4 different cards for one book. So that's a lot of typing if you have to do it originally. But if you can put it in there 4 times and just change one line, that's an easy thing. So I guess that developed that importance of doing things in the proper way, the acceptable way for that kind of so that's a publication in itself, just to do a card catalog card.
Yeah.
And then it was rolling into the electronic way. So yes, we also had to do that same type of thing for a card catalog that then became an electronic catalog for a library. So you see that sort of transitioned me into, from a library perspective and keeping things in a certain order that was by the Library of Congress, over into the American Psychological Association and the way they think things should be done for a journal article. So I think it sort of was a transition there for me. I was used to that necessity of having periods in a certain place, headings, a certain punctuation, a certain indentation. I mean, I knew what hanging indentions was before computers came out. And now the format we use for references is what they call hanging indentions. That means your first line is longer than your following lines for that paragraph about publishing a book or a magazine article. So that's one of the things I was used to doing for that. And I think that's what transitioned it for me.
This process is such a long and sometimes, people might consider a tedious process.
It is.
But yeah, but what, like, how have you maintained your commitment to the field over the years? Like, what drives you to continue doing this for years and years?
But one of the things, you get to read some things coming through, some of the research that's being done before other people get to read it. So
Mm.
that it helps me in keeping up with the field. Going into JMER being multilingual education is something that was outside of what I was doing with the other journals. The others one was just curriculum instruction, and there was very little that dealt with bilingualism in it. And then the second one was more on rural education, and it included all types of things that dealt with people living in rural areas and the ways they were trying to help education improve that way. So that was a whole, the county I'm in is still considered rural. Um, and so you learn, you keep on learning, and you keep finding out what's going on and what's working. And that to me was interesting to keep up with the profession. Um, and I ran across an article I thought somebody that I knew in another state might be interested in. I could always tell them, come look at our journal. So that's what I often did, was to help them, share and spread the word that some of the research that's being done is really interesting to know what people are looking at and how they're trying to improve and help education. It was my job to get it in the format for publication. So I had to make sure that, as you said, the periods were in the right place, or is that supposed to be a comma? But is this got an extra space here? How much space are we going to put between this row and this row? Where are we going to put this graphic, and how are we going to do this? And so you've got some guidelines that we have with the APA, but the rest of what you do is by eye, what it looks better and how it is going to appear on the paper, and to make sure you don't have a bunch of empty space sometimes. There's hidden characters in your word processing programs that you have to deal with, and put it together and put it up into the system. The system will put it into PDF format. And then you've got to, the editors decide what articles are going to go in which section. I think when we did a book review, that was actually a review of some audio tapes. No, I believe those were videotapes. And did a review of those. Most places don't do a review about new publications that are in digital format. And so that was something new that JMER was putting out too. I think that's one of the things that keeps it moving too, is you're always seeing innovative ways and innovative things to talk about.
Well, my final question for you is, you've been working in the field of education for 40 years, and then you worked another 20 years after you retired. What advice would you like to give to young scholars entering the world of academia today?
Oh, that's a good one. Keep your curiosity up, keep learning, keep looking for ways of sharing information and verifying what you're doing. It depends upon your field. If you come up with an idea in a school that you're working in and you want to try something out, document what you've done. And then maybe that becomes a beginning of a paper.